Okay, the date is January 22nd, 2026. The time is 6:17 a.m. and let's get started with today's video. So okay, so what did I do yesterday? Finished some applications for my prospective job, and I continued to do Uber deliveries for most of the day. So yeah, that's what I was up to for most of the day yesterday. And yeah, had a few drinks after the day of work, and that was really it though. So, yeah. What made yesterday interesting was that I had a longer day at work yesterday, and I had I actually paid a visit to Schofield Barracks over in around my location, in the island of Oahu. So that was definitely an interesting visit. It's always nice seeing people in active duty and just people just doing whatever they need to survive out there in the barracks. And so, yeah, it's always interesting to catch up on how they're doing, whatever they do, and stuff like that. Didn't strike up a conversation with too many people, but they seem to be doing okay for the majority of people that I spoke to yesterday. And yeah, it's definitely very nice to keep up with how our fellow servicemen are doing, and men and women are doing. So yeah. That was probably the highlight of my day. Was just having a conversation, or playing out a conversation, how a conversation would go out in the barracks. If I had a longer-winded conversation, definitely would have probably liked to have struck up a more of a conversation, you know, just for the sake of it. I always look to service members with high regard, and giving your life for a cause you might not necessarily believe in. That might be a projection on my part, but giving your life for a cause you might not 100% agree in, but in the from the lens of wanting to protect other people, is definitely a more positive spin on saying something. Yeah, just defending other people, protecting other people against other people is another thing. And yeah, it's definitely stuff like that that really gets me all riled up, and seeing people, you know, being professionals at their craft, and you know, just watching from a distance at what the administration may be up to, and the disagreements they may have, could be a little telling, because you know, there are things that we ultimately don't agree with, because free will is a wild concept that I don't completely grasp. But you know, it is what it is, though, at the end of the day, because, like, it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool, like, knowing that I'm in contact with, like, that I've come in contact with these people, and being able to provide my services to them through the use of Uber. Definitely kind of was kind of a nice little refresher. Gave me perspective on how the outside world could be. And yeah, it's like stuff like that, to be honest. And I had intended to create a little bit more conversation, or at least make my presence known there by smoking a few cigarettes, you know, just around the campus, or the barracks, rather. And would have loved to share my insight on, like, how some books that they should catch up on, or they could catch up on, you know, because, again, like, I don't know what they do, but, like, I don't know what it is that they do. I'm a civilian. I drank the Kool-Aid and I enjoyed it, in other words. Right? So, you know, that's my cup of tea. I say thank you. They say sorry. I don't know, what have you. They tell me about old connections. They told me about the past. And just shit like that, you know. I don't know. They recount their stories. They share their stories. And, yeah. Definitely a cool perspective to gain, and not a privilege that many people seem to have, but hey, as long as I'm allowed in, I'm assuming I can talk about it, and share with you my observations while in the barracks, the campus, whatever. That little plot of land that they share with Dinah. I was reminded of this reality quite consistently throughout that last Uber ride, because it was my last delivery of the day. And that reality was reinforced to me as I had been traversing across the island from the west side. And, yeah, stuff like that for sure. But, okay. The time is 6:46 a.m. The date is still January 2nd, 2026. And yeah, I just got interrupted there. I just got a little interrupted. I was confronted actually with a interesting issue that may be going a little unaddressed, considering I was talking under the grounds of um, service members and members who are on active duty. And so I asked the GPT a question. I wanted it to explain the rationale behind generalizing. Okay, here's the prompt verbatim. Okay. Explain the rationale behind generalizing a group of people, like members of active duty, and thinking they are capable of making virtuous decisions and have a mind for just cause. Basically, what I mean by that is, how being in a position of, somebody who thinks they're doing something right, are disciplined, are aligned with just cause. I don't know. I don't know how I completely feel about that. I don't know. I call it a change of heart. I don't know. I just can't feel completely justified in thanking everyone, but like, you know, I was generalizing them as a group of people, the active service members, and I was thinking that they could make decisions based on the grounds of being simply part of another selection, a service, a selected group of people, a selected group of people, and you know, those who we presume have a mind for making just decisions. And so I went on to apply that thinking to how they could abuse their position of power for someone who generalizes groups of people like them, such as myself, as I was before, and how I can treat them as if I'm not stroking their ego. Yes, a little incendiary, but it's okay. It's okay though. They can handle it. They should be able to handle it, but I don't know. And for doing something that I couldn't, like being conscripted, because I am not psychologically fit to serve. So I'm just not. Recruitment, particularly for recruitment, for being highly selective and discriminatory against those suffering from psychiatric illness, and in turn my intentionally being barred and excluded from service and having access to information that could benefit me. Basically what I'm referring to from the lens of the active service member who could be watching this video is basically learning about intelligence. Having intelligence. Intel. So, yeah. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Needless to say, I go on. Security doesn't make sense if I'm allowed into a barracks as a guest, yet excluded from service on the grounds of status of my mental illness. This is not a challenge to them to change the rules, whether or not I should be allowed into the barracks at all. Rather, it is a... I really don't want to call it that. I was about to call it a faith test. I will say it though. But my exclusion of the fact, as the GPT goes on to say, or starts with saying as its third point, the exclusion and why it feels illogical. It's just logically inconsistent. Because it kind of is. That's the side that the GPT had provided to me. Yeah. I apparently am referring to something that is quite common and is not very often addressed. And I don't have the clearest picture of what could be going on here, but I really don't. And uh, and I really don't have the clearest picture of what could be going on. Could be overt, could be covert, who knows? But I need to get my thoughts out there. So this is kind of like a value decision that I placed on the GPT to make for me. I am not of the opinion of, I am not swayed, but like this is clearly a non-discriminatory. It's not discriminatory. I mean, no, it's I think it's I think it should be fairly objective, and the argument's already been settled. Basically, like, if they're good, then what they do must be good. This isn't about the individual; it's about preserving a clean conscience for the public. There should always be testing grounds for testing, based on someone's character, moral virtue, and a morality can't be justified based on simply their action or decision years ago to start serving in the military. Selection bias mistaken for moral superiority. Yeah, stuff like that. And you will come across the active duty member who is simply virtuous and who is morally virtuous. You will find people like that. However, the maintenance of this myth and the legitimacy of a myth requires the virtue for this institution to rely on obedience, which makes the answer so much clearer in this case. The public widely accepted service members are more morally ordinary people, are under extraordinary pressure within rigid power hierarchies, which the GPT goes on, then scrutiny would increase. The myth that I'm referring to, why people generalize active duty members as virtuous or just, based on role-based moral outsourcing, selection bias, stuff like that, discriminatory practices that intentionally exclude members of institutions that are not in any position of authority. Okay, so that was the first point, and the second point: how the same generalization enables abuse of power, and presumed virtue lowers accountability. This is the Kool-Aid that I was referring to earlier, debatably, and presumed virtue lowers accountability. If someone is assumed to be selfless, disciplined, one of the good ones, quote unquote, then their mistakes are reframed as exceptions, their harm is minimized, their authority is less questioned as a result, and that's how the power quietly expands. So I think this is very much relevant to how what we see on the news is how we should interpret things. I don't know. That could be a step too far, but regardless, they're insulated from the outside world, and that's kind of dangerous, being in a position of moral superiority. And not everyone's gonna get it. Not everyone understands like how being morally virtuous could in turn, or morally superior, could result in something positive. But it's not always about the fact. It's less so about acknowledging the fact that you could be morally superior, and rather being more immersed in the work that you actually want to do. So they come at a crossroads. If they discharge from active duty, if they no longer are serving, then how do we integrate these people who constantly would say stuff like, say, I don't know, I serve, so therefore I have the moral superiority. But then again, you were also part of a very selective process. A discriminatory practice at that. I feel like anyone could go to school, but not everyone can serve at the moment. But we could see how this conversation could quickly derail. Right? I don't know. I don't know where to start with this, because like with active duty members, I don't know. I need to continue reading. Anyways, that hierarchy plus the moral halo equals danger. That's kind of the reasoning, the rationale behind this kind of thinking with regards to the generalization of enabling abuses of power. And this kind of goes in turn when rank already grants control and moral assumptions remove skepticism. You get conditions where abuse can occur without immediate challenge. Abuse can occur with immediate challenge, without immediate challenge. Outsiders are expected to defer. Insiders feel entitled to deference. Seems that this institution definitely seems to incentivize some sort of moral insulation, some kind of bubble that rarely gets entered or left through. But I think this was important for me to address because of how I was feeling earlier, how I was being sycophantic to members of active duty. And the exclusion on my, in turn, why it feels logically inconsistent. It is. This is a scenario. The GPT goes on. You're too psychologically risky to serve, but safe enough to enter facilities, interact socially, and exist in proximity to sensitive systems without regards to security. From a security standpoint, it does feel incoherent, but what is actually happening, apparently, it's correcting me here. The exclusion is about liability, not danger. Psychiatric disqualification is the clarification that it wants to say to me. The GPT isn't primarily you are unsafe, you are untrustworthy. It's not necessarily that. It's not only that. It's notwithstanding that information. It's you're statistically harder to manage is what they're trying to say. That's interesting to me. You increase institutional risk is what they're saying. You complicate command responsibility, but there still lies an underlying logical inconsistency here. And I'm not entirely sure as to what access to authority that I have going on here. And it seems definitely incongruent to what I am trying to address here. Let's see here. Institutions. I don't have knowledge of these institutions. This just seems like a moral gray area to me. And it just seems like this institution, if this institution is filled with people who are just simply incapable of anything, are just fodder, Minutemen, low quality soldiers. I don't know, dude. I don't know, but point is, I think it's not worth addressing all these questions if I'm just statistically harder to manage. I increased institutional risk. I complicate command responsibility. I challenge hierarchies. I what do I do? What else do I do? What else do I do? I challenge security. What do I do? I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to understand at the moment, but how to relate service to service members without striking ego is self-erasing. That's the practical part. I don't think that's as important. But clearly there's an injustice that I'm referring to, and the GPT is affirming that it's not completely irrational. There seems to be a basis of moral confusion here, and it's that I'm excluding the name of security. The inclusion and exclusion doesn't map cleanly onto actual risk. Meanwhile, I'm included and socially idealized, and I'm expected to defer to that idealization. I don't know. I don't know what else to say here, because like it's a lot of force-fed logic, a lot of force-fed reasoning that I can't particularly understand at the moment. And yeah, it's a little unfortunate, but yeah, something I definitely needed to address. I think it's the first 3 points, first 2 or 3 points that made the most sense here. Again, I wanted to understand the rationale behind the generalization of a group of people, that being the members of active duty here, and thinking that they are capable of making virtuous decisions. That all of them are. Assuming they're behind the trigger or something. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say, but it's called to all be in part with like creating a world that makes sense, coherent strategy, and yeah, a path that's difficult to follow, a rabbit hole, mind you, storytelling on the grounds of storytelling. Anyways, apply that thinking. I wanted the GPT to apply that thinking to how they could abuse their positions of power for someone who generalizes groups of them, like them, such as myself here, and how I can treat them as if I'm not stroking their ego, because probably I'm just simply incapable of overcoming that hurdle. So yeah, I think that's absolutely okay. I won't bite my lip over this. Won't bite my tongue. Won't bide my time too much. But lots of good points and a lot of moralities that we need to address here. Statistically harder to manage. Misunderstandings. Incongruence. I don't know. Incongruentness. I don't know. Regardless, I don't think they want. I wouldn't want to say that they would. I wouldn't go as far to say that they're looking for people who are controllable, statistically harder to manage. Unable to accept orders, take orders, you know, stuff like that, vernacular, as is the case of what we like to call pre-liberation movements. As we had as I attempt to juxtapose pre-liberation social constructivism in a community that is highly regulated, highly controlled, and communitarian by nature. Not the most neoliberal, not necessarily acting as agents of change, but rather biopolitical, technocratic, and security-centric. Not necessarily post-liberated. No, have we? But I can tell they're getting tired and the cracks are beginning to show. And when that comes in, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure though. I'm not entirely sure what it has to mean with regards to stuff like that, I suppose. Definitely stuff like that. Anyways, I hope you gained something from this conversation. The time is 7:08 a.m. The date is January 22nd, 2026, and I hope you all have a nice rest of your day.